Hello there. The British House of Commons voted in favour of the controversial Northern Ireland Protocol Bill in its third reading on Wednesday evening. With the planned law, the Brexit agreements on the north of the Emerald Isle should be able to be overridden unilaterally by London. The EU had previously expressed its concern about the project and threatened consequences, which already started. Despite some strong criticism from numerous MPs, in the end there were 267 yes votes for the project, 195 MPs voted against. However, before the law can come into force, it still has to go through the second chamber of Parliament, the House of Lords. That should happen after the summer recess. The draft is likely to meet with more resistance in the upper house. Should the government prevail with the plans, there should be serious upheavals with Brussels. In the worst case, a trade war threatens. The government in London wants to use the bill to force Brussels to reopen the agreement on the special status for Northern Ireland that was only concluded in 2019 as part of the Brexit Treaty. But the EU won't fall for blackmail, by the way. The EU Commission strictly rules this out and instead wants to negotiate solutions within the framework of the existing agreement. The Northern Ireland Protocol stipulates that the north of the Emerald Isle will remain part of the EU's internal market and European Customs Union. This was intended to prevent goods checks at the border with EU member Ireland in order to prevent the conflict between supporters and opponents of a reunification of the two parts of Ireland flaring up again. But controls or checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK are now necessary. The government in London wants to subsequently lift this consequence, but without presenting an alternative solution. The EU made tons of alternative solutions possible there. Boris Johnson's Brexit dividend is modest, but in foreign policy he has positioned global Britain as a self-confident player. Not effective, but self-confident. The Ukraine war has consolidated London's geostrategic role, but it also shows the British that their interests remain tied to Europe. And inflation in the UK continues to rise. In June, consumer prices rose by 9.4% compared to the same month last year, as the Statistics Office ONS announced on Wednesday. And this is the highest rate since records began in 1997. But according to a retrospective calculation by the ONS, inflation was probably higher in 1982. The statisticians made a similar statement in the previous month when the inflation rate was 9.1%, and they are expecting something up to 11. The Statistics Office explains the increase primarily with higher prices for energy and food. Used cars, on the other hand, were a little cheaper. The British Central Bank has been fighting inflation for some time by raising interest rates. It has raised its key interest rate several times since November to 1.25%. But without Brexit, it probably wouldn't look so bad. But they wanted to go for foreign policy. And in a poll conducted at the end of June, 90% of respondents expressed a very or fairly positive opinion of Boris Johnson. However, the survey did not take place in Great Britain, but in Ukraine. In the war-torn country, the outgoing British Prime Minister was almost as popular as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, because he's not doing interior politics there. At home, however, the situation was bleaker at the same time. Given the chaotic governance, the poor economy and the spate of affairs, a majority of Brits considered Johnson incompetent, unsympathetic and unreliable. A rebellion in cabinet and in the Tory faction eventually forced Johnson to resign on July 7th. A discrepancy between internal and external effects can also be seen in the case of Brexit, which has decisively shaped Johnson's career. The consequences of leaving the EU are being overshadowed by those of the pandemic and now the war in Ukraine. But there is growing evidence that Brexit is contributing to high inflation, sterling weakness and a slowdown in foreign trade. And meanwhile, Johnson never showed any vision for harnessing what they believe to be their potential benefits of Brexit. Liberal Brexiteers had hoped deregulation and tax cuts would make Britain more competitive, but Johnson's tax burden has soared to its highest level in 70 years. On the other hand, Johnson's vision for Brexit Britain was clearly recognizable in foreign policy. Using the catchphrase "Global Britain," he positioned Great Britain in 2021 as a country that wants to turn to the wider world after leaving the EU. In addition to the geographical dimension, the concept also has an ideal dimension. The United Kingdom wants to act as an independent player in changing alliances and put its weight at the service of democratic values and open trade routes. A bit overconfident, I think. Vladimir Putin's attack on Ukraine was the first test for global Britain. While Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron hesitated, Johnson showed a clear edge. At the G7 summit in Bavaria, he recently emphasized that the West should not pressure the Ukrainians to give up territory, and he called for staying strategically powerful. To justify this, he drew a comparison to the fight against Nazi Germany. It took a long time and was very expensive, but it brought us decades of stability, a rule-based world order, and long-term prosperity. Yeah, the EU helped a lot with that, by the way. Johnson's rhetoric is reflected in the military aid. According to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, Great Britain has delivered the most weapons and military aid to Ukraine after the USA. Even when you add up military, economic, and humanitarian aid, the UK performs better than any other European country. That's true. Not only the Ukrainian population appreciates the British commitment. President Zelensky also explicitly counted Johnson among his closest allies. Great Britain has consolidated its position as a regional military power in Europe. Johnson signed bilateral security guarantees with prospective NATO members Sweden and Finland to protect the two countries from Russian encroachment until their membership in the military alliance is a fact. Johnson's brash Ukraine policy was unchallenged, not only among the Tories but also among the opposition. No course correction is therefore to be expected under a successor. Brexit skeptics argue Britain would have a much greater influence if the country, as an EU member, fought alongside the Baltics and Poland for tougher European sanctions against Putin. Brexit advocates counter that only leaving the EU gave the country the leeway to react agilely and briskly to the war and to assume a strategic leadership role in Europe, which is complete bullshit because they could have done the exact same in the EU. What is certain is that the British will not isolate themselves on their island after Brexit, but will play a self-confident geopolitical role. Another question is whether Great Britain has also become less European and thus more global after Brexit, as some Brexiteers with nostalgic memories of the old empire hoped. I think they got more xenophobic. The thesis is confirmed when looking at the migration flows. Although the immigration of EU citizens has decreased, in return more Nigerians, Pakistanis or Filipinos are coming to the country. The bottom line is that immigration has even increased, even though migration was a main reason for Brexit. So, happy birthday. The end of the EU's unlimited free movement of people is likely to have given the government the leeway to allow 100,000 Hong Kongers into the country in response to Beijing's authoritarian course. However, a look at trade flows shows that the British economy today is less internationally oriented than it was before Brexit. The country cannot escape its geography. Bureaucratic hurdles make access to the EU market difficult, but neighboring countries remain the most important export markets. Meanwhile, new free trade agreements with distant countries like Australia are of little consequence. To make matters worse, globalization is entering a less open phase. Under the keyword friendshoring, the future world economy is likely to be organized more locally and rely more on cooperation among like-minded people. A quantum leap for the British would therefore be the hoped-for trade agreement with Washington, for which neither Donald Trump nor Joe Biden ever showed enthusiasm, and this Congress, especially with this government, doesn't either. The AUKUS Security Pact shows that Great Britain is strategically more global. The cooperation between Great Britain, the USA, and Australia is to supply Canberra with nuclear submarines. From a purely legal point of view, Britain could have concluded this agreement as a member of the EU, but politically, it stands for Global Britain in several respects. It symbolizes the focus on the Indo-Pacific region and is based on old alliances with English-speaking countries and former colonies. Johnson's great role model, Winston Churchill, named the the doctrine of the three concentric circles of British foreign policy in 1948: the Commonwealth, the Anglosphere with the USA, and Europe. Great Britain is the only country that is located at the interface of all three circles, which ensures its global political importance, argued the wartime Prime Minister. But while Global Britain wants to strengthen the Anglosphere and the Commonwealth, Johnson's Brexit policy threatened to weaken Britain's position in Europe, and it has. His successor should see that British credibility suffers if London selectively applies international law and wants to unilaterally override the Northern Ireland Protocol sealed in the 2019 Brexit Treaty. But we know what happens if Truss gets there, as I believe. Should the dispute over Northern Ireland degenerate into a trade war with the EU, this would threaten the Western alliance with Putin. The British rightly accuse Beijing of breaching the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration on Hong Kong. Chinese state propaganda has already begun to counter such allegations with a smug reference to London's planned breach of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So Beijing is taking London as a role model. The war in Ukraine made the British realize that their very own security interests remain closely linked to the European continent, even in times of Global Britain. The confrontation with authoritarian Russia will tie up military resources for years to come. The economic situation will also make it difficult for Johnson's successor to expand the defense budget significantly, which is why London lacks the funds to play a substantial military role in the Pacific to secure sea routes and contain China at the same time. Great Britain is not only one of the pillars of NATO, but alongside France, it is the only nuclear and real military power in Europe. An integrated European army remains a Brussels dream. The conflict with Putin is likely to drag on, and the US could reduce its involvement in Europe under a president like Donald Trump if he ever returns. Therefore, the continental Europeans also have a fundamental interest in Brexit Britain not escaping its geography and remaining anchored in the European community of the future. And as I said, I believe it's a very good chance for Liz Truss now to be in that place, and I see quite dark times for that, what we need. I'll see you in my next video. Ich komme wieder.